In this video, we're going to continue working on our Google Sheets long-term athlete dashboard project, and we're going to take our long-term KPI graphs and scale all of our values so that when we are putting two values together that have very different metrics, we can see them on the same graph under the same scale. This is going to be really powerful if you want to look at multiple metrics on the same chart over time. So let's get after it. Okay, so we're back, and as a reminder of where we left off in the last video, we created all of our filter pane where we can select all of our tests. As well, in our DataViz reference tab, we started to create the reference for our first long-term chart. Now, the problem that we ran into is if we were graphing something like a bench 1RM with a 10-meter sprint, you can see by the graph that we created that these two values don't really go well together, since the 10-meter sprint is measured in like 1 and 2 seconds, and the back squat is measured in hundreds of pounds. So on the graph, you can't really see the changes between the two tests. So one of the solutions that we can use to solve this is we can create a scaling factor from 0 to 100, where a 0 score would be the lowest value in the whole data set, and 100 would be the highest value. So what this allows us to do is basically take all of the values from our data set and give them a score between 0 and 100 depending on what their actual value is. And then that allows us to compare metrics across different types of tests so that we can see which ones rank where in our actual data set. So that's what we're going to work through today, and the ability to do that. So the first thing I'm going to need to do is just create 2 more boxes here where we can start to put in those tests. So what I'm going to do is type these in, and I'm just going to call this the name of the actual test. So I'm just going equals and then the name of the test, and then again equals and then the name of the test. So they are stored in B5 and D5. And I'll just make the text white so that we can see it. And when we go to graph our values, they are all going to be here and here, and they're all going to be in scores from 0 to 100. Now, in order to do this, there is an actual formula for this, and what it is value minus minimum over maximum minus minimum, and then the whole thing times 100. And that will actually scale to a value out of 100. So we know our values. In this case, value 1 is 365, value 2 is 235, value 3 is 240, and then test 1, we got 1, 1, and 2. The way that I like to do this in the sheets that I create is to actually create a separate tab where we can set up our tests. So I'm going to add a sheet, and we're just going to call this test setup. And this is where I like to actually create this min and max value. So the first thing that I want to look up is just our test name. And then I usually have a box for minimum being better, because we know in tests like sprints, a lower value is actually a better value, okay? And then I would pull out the min and the max values. Now, because this is all this sheet is going to do, I'm just going to hold Control-Shift, select the column, and go all the way across and delete all of the columns that I don't need. And I'll give this the same type of header that we've been giving all the other sheets. And I'll just center that and bold it. And that looks pretty good. And then from here down, I'm just going to format this to give it some alternating colors. We do not have a header, so we will remove that and hit done. So this is going to be where we set up our actual tests. Now, the way that I like to toggle whether minimum is better or not is just with a checkbox. So I'll select all of these cells in this column, and I'll hit insert and go down to checkbox. And now what we have is a checkbox where we can actually turn on whether a minimum test is better. For our actual test setup, what we can do is create a data validation for all of our tests. So I can just highlight all of these cells here and go to data validation, and let's go a list from range. And the range that I want is on our admin tab, and we can select all of our tests through this column, and we'll just go C2 all the way down and hit OK. When I hit save, if we go back to our test setup tab, now we have a spot where we can actually select our tests. And the reason that I'm doing it that way is, like everything in a spreadsheet, all of the things have to be spelled the same, they have to have the same syntax, etc., so that when we're looking them up, they all match. So out of these tests here, the only one we have that min is better is going to be our 10-meter sprint. So I'm going to check that box. So let's start to build a formula now that allows us to actually pull out the min and max value. So we'll start it with counter movement jump because the minimum isn't better there. So let's pull out our minimum value. So what I want to do here is type equals, and then we're going to use the formula min, M-I-N, open that up, and it's going to ask me what is the value that I actually want to pull out. So what we're going to type in here is we're going to index and match for that value. So I'm going to type index, open that up, we'll use our data reference that we've created, comma, comma, and then we're going to match for it. So I'm going to match, M-A-T-C-H, open that up. We're going to use A3 as our cell reference, and I want to match that in headers. Where is our headers tab? Oh, we called it titles in this project. So we're going to match for titles, and we know that it is false in our match. And then I'm going to close this off and close it all off again and close the min formula off and hit enter. And you can see that is our minimum counter movement jump. And if we took this exact same formula, Control C, and I just pasted it right under max, and I just changed this min to max, now we can pull out our max value. Okay, so another look at that formula is min, and then we're doing that same index match. So we're matching all the way through our data, and then we're matching for the test in our titles, and then false, and we're pulling out the minimum from that column. I'm going to hit enter. Now what you'll see here is if I paste those formulas into the top, we know that a minimum value in our 10-meter sprint is actually better. So I want this one over here, but on the toggle switch, I actually want it to change. So what we're going to do is I'm going to wrap this up into an if statement. So it's going to look like this. If, open this up, if this cell is true, so I just have to select this cell because it gives a value of true when it's selected. If that's true and a minimum is better, then in this case, we want to pull out the max. So I'm going to copy this and paste it in there. But if it's not, we want to pull out the min. And I'm going to close this whole thing off. And we're using the same formula. So what we're saying is if B2 is true, then pull out the minimum. Okay, because that means a minimum is better. And if it's not, or sorry, this should be max. If B2 is true, then pull out the maximum value. Otherwise, pull out the minimum. And when I hit enter, you can see now as we toggle this, it allows us to either pull out the min or the max. The only last thing that I like to do to my formulas, and I'm going to wrap this whole thing in an if error, I-F-E-R-R-O-R, open that up, comma, double quotations at the end to tell it to be blank if there is an error, and I'll hit enter. And then I just have to copy this formula over to max, paste that in, and I'm just going to flip these because now we would want to pull out the min and we'd want to pull out the max if max is better, and hit enter. So when I hit enter here, you can see that as I select this, it either flips them or doesn't. So now that I've created this, I should be able to drag it all the way down, and it works for all of our formulas here. And as I flip it, if I were to select any of these, it's going to set up our test that way. Okay, so that's part one. That is how we are going to pull out our minimum and maximum values. Now let's go back to our data viz reference. And what I like to do is we could easily reference those back on this sheet, but I always like to have all of the information available that I'm going to need for my calculations. So what I'm going to do here is do an easy VLOOKUP and pull out the minimum value for that test. So it looks like this, equals VLOOKUP. Open that up, and I'll open this up so we can see. We want to look up the search key. So I'm going to look up the test that we've selected, which is right here, comma, and I want to look it up in our test setup. Okay, so if I go back to my test setup, I want to, oh, it closed off the thing for me. Hold on one sec here. We want to look it up in our test setup. So I'm going to select all of these columns. Whoops, all the columns. And we want to pull out the minimum value. So it's the 1, 2, 3, the third column, and then comma, false. And open that up. Okay. When I hit enter, our minimum bench 1RM should be 178. And indeed, when we go look that up, it is. We're going to do the same thing one more time. I'm going to just copy the formula, put it under max, but instead of the third column, we're going to pull out the fourth, and that gives us our maximum. And because I've left this sort of wide open, if I paste it here, if we just change some of the formulas, the only one I have to lock in is right here. I just have to lock in our cell reference, and I should be able to just paste these over here, and they should work. Okay, so that's how we're going to pull out our minimum and maximum values. So what we're doing is VLOOKUP for this value here, bench 1RM. We're going to look it up in our test setup sheet, take the third column, and false lookup. Hit enter. Now finally, the last thing that I have to do is convert these values now to values out of 100. If you remember our formula, it's value minus minimum over max minus minimum times 100. So basically what I want to do is create a formula that looks like this. Equals, open this up, and the value is 365 minus the minimum, which is 178, bracket, divided by 396 minus 178. And then I want to multiply it by 100. And I just got to put a bracket around the whole thing. Multiply by 100 and hit enter. So you can see this gives me a value of 85.798. So I could easily just leave that in there. And if I wanted to, I could just lock all those in place and drag it down. And that would work fine. But I'm kind of, I like to create a formula once and then be able to just type it in once and it does the work for me the whole time. So what we're going to do is create a formula called array formula. And what an array formula does is it looks to see if something is true and then it calculates every time that that thing is true. So how this is going to look is equals if C8 equals true. Okay. And instead of C8, we're going to use B8. Okay, so if this is true, that means we're going to want to show this series, comma, okay, array formula, open this up, and we're going to put an if formula in here too. If, basically, B11 all the way to B, okay, so if this column does not equal blank, then what I want you to do is array formula, open this up, and we got to put a bunch of brackets in here. So we're doing that min-max formula. So I want you to take that value, B11 to B, minus the min value, which is B6, lock that in, bracket, divided by, open this up, max, B7, lock it in, minus B6, lock it in, bracket around the whole thing now, multiply that by 100, close off the array formula, and if it is blank, then we're going to return blank, bracket, and bracket. When I hit enter, what it's done is it's taking all those values and converted them. Okay, so I'm going to walk you through this formula one more time because there's a lot going on here. So first thing we want to check for, if show test is true, meaning that we actually want to show the test, then we actually go into this calculation. So array formula. Now if B11 to B, so this whole column, if that's not blank, meaning there's a value in here, what we want to do is now take whatever that value is from B11 to B, subtract the minimum, divide by maximum minus minimum times 100. If it is blank, then I just want you to return blank. Otherwise, we would return blank at the end as well. When I hit enter, there it is. Now the last piece that I want to add to this is I just want to round this to a multiple of 0.5, because if you look here, 85.77, I'd rather that just be 87.5 or 88. So around this array formula, I'm going to type mround. That's the value that I want. Then I'm going to go to the end of it and type comma. The multiple that I want is 0.5. Close that off and hit enter. And now it's just basically going to round all those to 0.5. I'll put that somewhere in the middle, and that looks pretty good to me. Okay, so that's our formula there. I'm going to do that one more time. I'm going to copy this whole formula, Control C, and I'm just going to paste it here, Control V. This time, instead of B8, we need to look at D8, and instead of B11, we need to look at C11 to C, and instead of B11, we need C11 here, and instead of B's here, we need D's. And when I hit enter, you'll see 100, 100, 0. And the only reason that it's doing that is because I only have 1s and 2s in there as my actual values. Okay. Now finally, all we're going to do for this one is I'm just going to take these and make these my graph now. So if I highlight this, the dates, bench 1RM, and 10-meter sprint, and I'm going to hit insert, and then I'll hit chart. You can see that now right away things look a lot better. I prefer a bar chart, so I'll make it like this, and I'll just change the other series to a bar as well. And you can see that this looks a lot better already. So now we have values that basically match each other. I'm going to switch to a different test. So instead of 10-meter sprint, let's take, like, I don't know, let's try pro agility. And actually under our test setup, pro agility minimum should be better. So we can go here, and that looks a lot better. So you can see now certain tests as they interact with each other. So I hope this video helps you out, and if it does, if you could like and subscribe to the channel, that would really help me out. And in the next video, what we'll start to do is calculate out some team averages and finish off this KPI chart so that we can now put this on our main dashboard. And then you can see it's just going to be the same type of chart 3 times. So we'll just copy it over 3 times, and then we'll start to work through our scoring graphs in the next few videos. So I will see you in the next video. Thank you.